Welcome back to our listeners and viewers of the Responsible Edge podcast, brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Chris Wright, Head of Sustainability and Decarbonisation at Avison Young. In this episode, we're talking about climate transition action plans, detailed, credible roadmaps that move companies from climate targets to climate action. So how do we separate serious plans from greenwash? And what does that look like when bricks and mortar and carbon are your daily reality? Chris, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show this afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Charlie, a pleasure, and thank you for the invite.
Now, Chris, you and I know we met. We were trying to work out when we did meet, which feels like it might have been in 2025, but we're both I think pretty hectic. So sort of trying to work out has been tricky. But I know that you've got a particularly interesting journey and experience that you've been through so far in your career. And there's particular sections of it that I really want to kind of dive into. But to start with, let's go back to the very beginning, if possible, or as close to the beginning as we can. Talk us through the kind of the formative experiences that you can recall of the nature, the environment, perhaps your experiences of right and wrong, those things that really help shape your worldview and ultimately led you to the career that you've taken on.
Yeah, cheers, Charlie. I think there's a couple of bits. So I think first, as an engineer, I'm probably slightly different in the realm of some people that do these roles. So engineering at university, I've always been inquisitive about the world, but my inquisitive nature has always been, how do you challenge the status quo and find a way to do something better? How do we continually evolve and innovate so that today we're 1% better than we were yesterday and tomorrow we'll be 1% better than we were today? So that sort of mantra, I've tried to live by it. And the roles that I've chosen have always been to challenge myself a little bit and to maybe challenge some sort of more of the conventional thinking. But I think that when it comes to climate, I'm a sort of a late bloomer in that realm, really. And it was my last role. So yes, I'm at Avison Young now, but I started there at the end of September. But prior to that, I was 12 years at Tesco. Did a myriad of roles at Tesco, 10 roles over 12 years. But it was the final 3 years of that I think really set me on this journey. And I was head of energy and engineering for the Tesco group. So I think it helps if I put it into context in terms of the scale of that organisation, and then a particular meeting where it sort of dawns on me just the scale of the role that I was doing. So Tesco's, very large corporate. And for those, Charlie, that, may be sort of listening to you from abroad, largest retailer in the UK. It's got 4,500 stores over 5 countries, 180 million square foot. If you added car parks on, it's additional 60 million square foot. 1% of the national grid, which equates to Madagascar, if you wanted to actually put that into sort of energy usage in something you can relate to, and uses enough gas to heat 10,000 homes. So that is the business. And when I started in the role of head of energy and engineering, my remit was around energy consumption reduction, all of the engineering facets, but I was accountable for the decarbonisation of scope 1 and 2 across the portfolio. And I remember sat in a meeting, we set up a new governance structure, which we'll probably touch on later. Sat in this meeting in April 2022, and the pie chart, or the most complex pie chart I'd ever seen, goes on the screen that displays Tesco's scope 1 and 2 emissions. And it was 1.7 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. And I looked at that. And then the summary I've just given you in terms of the scale of the business, that was adjacent on another slide in terms of setting the scene. And it just dawned on me, not only the scale of my role, but sort of the responsibility that was on my shoulders at that point to really, and if I was accountable for, scope 1 and 2 and the decarbonisation, how do you move that forward? It's an absolute behemoth. And I think that's the point where I sort of really understood the scale of my role, the scale of Tesco, and the importance of my role in really driving that forward over the following years.
And Chris, that was brilliantly introduced. I want to take you back to we're going to talk about sort of Avison Young and what you're doing now towards the end of this section. But taking you back to the beginning, you mentioned that you did engineering at university. You were always curious about how things worked and how to make things better. Did you always have in mind, when you look back now, that you would end up in a role like you did working with Tesco, working on that kind of scale and with that degree of responsibility under your watch? Was that always the goal and intention for the young Chris?
Yeah, I think so. When I joined Tesco, I'm probably one of these rare people who I ended up leaving Tesco having the dream job that I wanted it when I joined. So, which I think is great when you leave a business actually having fulfilled the dream of when you first joined the business.
Super cool, yeah.
Which I think is fantastic. Now, ultimately, 12 years is quite a long time. So I think that when I joined, clearly I wanted to do the role of head of energy and engineering for the business, but probably the climate and sustainability agenda back then wasn't as evolved as it clearly was now or has been over the last few years. But yeah, when I joined Tesco, I joined actually within their maintenance team, and then I moved into engineering, and I did a role head of engineering project delivery, which is where I was actually building some of these, I suppose, standing over some of the innovations, technologies, the trials, etc., that were really, like I say, when you're that big as a business that Tesco was, dawns on you pretty quickly, Charlie, you're always going to have to go first. You have no one else that you can look to go, well, I'm just going to sit back and wait and see how they do it. That doesn't exist. So I came up with this phrase. I said that we were market makers because we had the scale that we could actually drive a particular market, we could drive a particular technology or a particular innovation in a direction that we wanted and that others would follow. And to have that ability is incredibly rare, to actually have that scale to, like you say, just create a market and pivot it in the direction that you actually want to. Now, that suits your own needs, because you clearly have to go years ahead of others. And again, it's that whole engineering mentality around evolution, that innovation, just how can we do it differently? And then it feeds down into training, skills gap, and all those other sorts of bits that we can touch on later.
And it really, it's such an interesting sort of reflection point, Chris, to this whole notion of sort of with great power comes great responsibility, but also great opportunity. How well, I mean, there'll be lots of people listening into this who know Tesco and are aware of, the organization's operations. When you left, how well or how pleased were you with the progress that had been made?
So I was absolutely chuffed, but I think it helps to understand the maturity of Tesco as a business. So it was the first corporate globally to sign up to science-based targets, 1.5 degree science-based target. It baselines goes back to 2015, and its interim targets were a 35% reduction by 2020, a 60% reduction by 2025, 85% by 2030, and then 100% reduction by 2035 for scope 1 and 2, that is. So when I left at the end of September last year, it was at 63%. So it was actually, if you think that was due to be at 60, so it was ahead of its projections. So I was absolutely delighted to actually, and I think they've announced in their end of year results recently, they're at 65%. So even in those few months, a business of that organization, they've moved it forward another couple of percent. So I was delighted, Charlie. But yeah, that business was a very large, mature business in terms of its outlook and its appetite to deliver against its renewable commitments. And
Chris, you alluded to it there, but like, how does that make you feel from a satisfaction perspective? Like what was it like for you working 12 years, as you say, having in mind this role that you wanted to fulfill and the impact that you wanted to have within the organization? You then not only have realized that role, but you've gone beyond the target that ultimately you had set for yourself, you guys had set in order that you wanted to achieve. Like, what was that like for you personally? It must have been incredibly satisfying.
I mean, there is an enormous sense of pride that comes with that, because I mean, it is like nudging an oil tanker. You're making these interventions and you're making these investments and these enhancements and these upgrades, and you're bringing in new technologies, innovations, and you can forecast them so much. But then when the proof's in the pudding and you actually do it, and then you see those, when we sort of redo the baseline, and then you see, right, this is where we are in terms of actual reduction, and it's actually a little bit ahead of where you were, you go, Christ, that's absolutely fantastic. But the inquisitive nature within me goes, well, why are we ahead? How did we get some of our forecasting wrong? Is there something washed through that we weren't aware of? So it's that iterative process so that you can constantly refine it. So I was always looking to better ourselves and how we do it. But the team is really important in terms of how you set the team up to deliver it. Because I think that you need to state the case for change, because it's one thing for me to sort of, the phrase, Charlie, with great power comes great responsibility. It's one thing for that to dawn upon me. But how do you make that distill into the team in terms of what they're delivering, how they're delivering, put it front of center of everything that they're doing? How does it become sort of, the anchor for every decision they make that day? And there's ways around it in terms of objectives, incentives, bonuses, etc., which help really center people. I think one of the best things Tesco did is to actually align its core purpose. So it tweaked its core purpose to include the word planet. So it went serving our customers, colleagues, and planet. Serving our customers, communities, and planet a little better every day. And it's amazing with the word planet being put in that, how it resonated with customers and how it resonated with colleagues in that business, because it made it really clear that, those commitments were front and center of everything that business was going to do.
It's amazing that somebody, again, tell me if I'm being unfair here, but as an engineer, as somebody who's into the nuts and the bolts, if you like, for you to observe the power of the use of language and the power of brand positioning on, the collective sort of, collective thinking and culture within the organization, that's an amazing thing to observe. Out of interest, you mentioned there about like people and leading people. How did you find that as a sort of, your natural disposition? How have you found the experience of being a leader within an organization like Tesco?
A business like Tesco is fantastic because retail is primarily based on leadership. Tesco is 320,000 people strong in the UK alone. And to deliver what you need to deliver is through great leadership, because it's not about telling people what to do. It's about, encouraging them and showing them what's possible and really taking them on that journey. I think that I noticed that sea change when the core purpose changed. There were people in the business where the planet element did resonate with them so much more. So, the old phrase, make hay while the sun shines. So then how do you then build upon that and build that sort of, that snowball of momentum around discussions around what we want to do, why we want to do it, how we want to do it. So reaching out to all the business leaders, the retail leaders, etc., talking to them about it and trying to bring it to life for them. So one of the bits I've tried to pride myself on is take some quite complex themes and distill it down so that people just really understand it and can buy into it. So I think it's a sign of a good engineer as well. It's not about bamboozling people. I always used to have this phrase, that engineering is why we can do something, not why we can't. Because I think that there are people who sometimes turn around and go, you can't do that. Whereas I flip it on its head and go, as an engineer, you should find a way that you can. And just that rhetoric and that can-do mentality and approach of always saying there is a way for us to do this, however big the challenge is, however many years we're looking out over the horizon, there is a way for us to deliver this.
And what's fascinating from what you described so far, Chris, is that I see the combination of that can-do attitude with the curiosity that you've mentioned on a number of occasions, and combining those two mindsets, if you like, can create the perfect conditions for, I guess, problem solving at a significant scale and with a significant impact. Let me ask you, we've spoken about Tesco. We've spoken about the fact that you realized, this senior position, you realized this fantastic outcome, and then you left the organization. Having been successful in realizing the goal that you wanted to achieve with the targets that were set, what do you think when you look at other organizations that are trying to do similar things to that you did at Tesco? What are the major reasons why they don't achieve these objectives and these targets that have been set?
I think one of my takeaways, Charlie, is just around, I think they get stuck in a little bit of paralysis that comes from a few different areas. I think they look at what the costs are initially and think, where do I even start with that? And I think they focus on the cost before they actually look at the plan in terms of how to deliver it. So I think that once you do the plan and then do a few pilots, you then can start to quickly understand how you can drive down some of that incremental cost, how you can align it to some existing programs of work, etc. And I think it's that they look at it at the macro level, and I think they just get bamboozled by the absolute scale of it. So I think they're the ones that, I call it ambition to action. So they're the ones that I think genuinely want to do it but don't know how. And I still think there's a handful of those that put their head in the sand and just hope this is going to go away, which ultimately won't. And there's a great quote that I saw from EY in, I think it was 2023, and it was 80% of FTSE 100 corporates have committed to net zero by 2050, but 95% of that 80% had yet to actually share a credible pathway or transition plan to get there.
Everyone.
I think that this is, I think some people think it is just a case of, I'll sign up to it and hope it'll happen. It won't. And I think that you need to understand, and you need to plan that journey out in its entirety. And, at Tesco, we planned that journey out over a 13-year horizon. So we knew what you needed to do year by year, asset by asset, intervention by intervention over a 13-year horizon to get you to where you needed to be, which then enables you to do so many great things like procurement planning and strategy, long-term capital planning. It's also important because the average tenure of a CEO in the UK is circa 5.2 to 5.4 years, and a CFO is like 4.6 to 6.4 years, depending on where you look. So you need something, a plan that goes beyond the tenure of your C-suite so that everyone can buy into it.
Brilliant. I mean, there's so much to pick out of that, Chris, but my immediate thought is we've got a blueprint there for how we should approach politics. But anyway, moving on to a further point before we go down that rabbit hole. I want to look forward now. And I know that you've joined Avison Young and your I want to talk about your work there as well. And in fact, actually, no, let's start there and then I'll ask my further question. So just talk us through kind of the decision to leave Tesco, like why you made it, why Avison Young seemed like a good opportunity, like what you've experienced from it so far, any differences, any real nuances in your experience to date compared to Tesco. Just talk us through kind of what happened post Tesco.
Yeah, I mean, and clearly you can see probably from the conversation, Charlie, I will have a perpetual love for the Tesco business because it was a brilliant place to work and I enjoyed every moment of it for 12 years. But when you build your plan over a 13-year horizon and then you start to get into sort of year one and year two of delivering that, I suppose in the nicest possible way, who wants to spend the next decade delivering the plan that they built? And I think it's time for people with some different insight, to come in and sort of really galvanize that and move it forward. But also, I think it became apparent to me sort of in the first half of last year that I had learnt so much. And this is when I was going to some industry events and roundtables, etc. And I had learned so much from my time at Tesco in terms of how to go about delivering this. There are a lot of people still talking about the whats and the whys, but in terms of how to go about delivering. And I thought, wouldn't it be fantastic? Tesco's is an incredibly mature organisation, probably more mature than most, and it is light years ahead of everyone else. But wouldn't it be amazing if I could take all that knowledge and experience and go and help those organizations that are at the start of their journey, or either they've started and they're on track, but they've got a long way to go. They've started and are behind, or they haven't even started. So, and I knew a chap, who's my current boss, James Porter from Avison Young. So I'd known James for a while, and James and I had some conversations. And culturally, it is the absolute perfect fit. It's just a wonderful organisation to be part of.
And Chris, sorry to interrupt you, but why? What's the culture at Avison Young?
So that entrepreneurship, and it's almost like a business that rewards entrepreneurship, a can-do attitude, and tenacity, which I'd like to think I possess in sports. And it's like, we've got clients, they've got problems, go out there and work with them to find solutions. And I said this and whilst I love Tesco, I said this to James when I'd started with Avison Young. Having spent 12 years in retail, so clearly Tesco's is a huge organisation, but retail is still quite narrow in terms of the scope of what you're doing. And I said, it's like I left Tesco and joined Avison Young, and it's like I started to see the world in colour when I'd only ever seen it in black and white. So all of these brilliant conversations with funds, developers, occupiers, landlords, from office to industrial logistics, etc. And those richness of those conversations, and the fact that so many of those people are like, we want to do this. How do we go about doing it? And that's the really, really exciting bit. And like I say, some of those are yet to start the journey. Some of them are on the journey, but the appetite's there. So yeah, I mean, I speak to someone yesterday, one of my colleagues when I was at Tesco, they said, so how are you settling into the new job? And I went, well, I think the new job is now actually 7 months old. So it's a bit longer than the new job. But I'd probably turn around and say I'm sort of having the time of my life at the moment, would be the best way to describe it. It's just a brilliant organisation that wants you to go out and solve problems for clients, regardless of what that problem is. And that resonates with me as an individual, and it resonates with what gets me going. It resonates with what excites me.
As soon as you started mentioning the characteristics of the cultural fit, I was thinking, yes, it's going to be that can-do element, that entrepreneurial, engineering focused problem solving with that curiosity that you've alluded to before. Chris, I'm going to ask you one more question about you before we talk about the article. It's a bigger, broader question. When you look at, and obviously you're somebody who's incredibly well experienced in this area, but when you look at the sort of collective goals and targets that we've set for ourselves, and sort of the state of play, if you like, with some of the larger organizations here in the UK, let's say, that are working towards this, how hopeful are you or not about where we're headed from a decarbonisation perspective?
I suppose, well, I'll preface my answer, Charlie, by saying I'm a perennial optimist.
Excellent.
I think we'll do it. I do. I think that there are the right foundations going in place at the moment that we may touch on in terms of power and renewables and some of the commitments around that, and the 2030 Clean Energy Action Plan and grid reform. So I think that some of those really important foundations are going in place. Businesses want to do this, and I think that businesses will soon switch on that there is value to be derived from these interventions. And I think that engineering mentality as well is, I'm not going to be one of these people who says you need to do it because it's the right thing to do. We need to find a way to show that it's the right thing to do because it adds value and drives returns. Because I think that when you demonstrate the value that can be added and had, I think then again you make the case for change, and then you can really drive forward with the scale of what we need to do over the years ahead.
Do you, on that point, what do you think is, when you, again, putting crystal balls together and things, but when you think about the mistakes that are made by people that are in similar positions to yourselves working in organizations whereby they aren't able to make that compelling commercial case for investing in these things? What mistakes are they making, do you think, in conveying the value?
I think the first one, I think, would be you're either not putting the plan together for the full life of what you need to do, or you're focusing too much on the really high cost capex interventions, whereas there's some really good low hanging fruit you can go for straight away to drive down your energy consumption. You drive down your energy consumption, you drive down your carbon consumption, you get an opportunity to rebaseline. What you're going to spend on capex before might be less than what you need to spend now. And I think that sometimes, the best way to describe it is that I think they probably do the right parts of what they need to do, but in the wrong order.
Yes. I understand and appreciate the low-hanging fruit, as you've alluded to. Show the wins, and then ultimately the momentum built from the wins will allow you to scale up and perhaps tackle some of the bigger, more challenging pieces. Is that a fair synopsis?
Yes, absolutely. If you've got to think, and one thing you need to think about, that what we're doing here is probably going to be one of the largest, grandest global scale change management pieces of work that will ever take place. Yeah. And the start of any change management is make the case for change. And once you make the case for change, you said the exact words, Charlie, show the quick wins and the low hanging fruit to build momentum, to build customer C-suite buy-in, so that you can then start to build that momentum to move forward with that change.
Do you, in light of this, Chris, and thinking about your work at Avison Young, do you find yourself, have you almost got like the sort of the blueprint, if you like, in mind? And is it really just about going in and understanding the particulars of that organization and the context they find themselves in, but then really just applying the same formula, if you like, in terms of strategic building to any organization? Or am I massively oversimplifying, no, the nature of things?
I don't think you are actually, Charlie, because in preparing for today, I actually, and I've not done this in quite a long time, I actually sat down and wrote down what would be my process to portfolio-wide or large-scale asset decarbonisation. And I ended up, I rewrote it a couple of times and I went through a few iterations and I sort of put some different scenarios through it. And I think it is a case of there is a process that you can follow. But I think what people need to realize is that there's some elements at the front end, such as, you set your targets, set your commitments, put your governance in place. You then go and build the plan. And once you build the plan, your baseline, etc. But all of the activities I had from build the plan onwards, I found actually they became a closed loop in themselves, because when you get to deliver plan and all this and on all the interventions in between, you go back to build the plan again, because you're constantly iterating it and revising it. So because has the cost of CapEx gone down? Has it gone up? What does it look like in terms of labour, availability, parts, training, procurement strategy, and all of those pieces? Is there a new CFO? Is there a new CEO? And those first two bits are standalone, but then the next bit I actually found was a closed loop that goes on until you have actually delivered upon your commitments over however long that might be.
Super interesting. It's that living, breathing, organic, evolving nature of the way that we go about implementing and learning. I think it's such an interesting insight already, Chris. But let's move. As you can see, we've obliterated my timings, and my producers will be well in my ear again. But I'll get away with it. Let's move on to the article for this week. So I think it was, and I'm sorry to authors again, I always butcher names, but Aaron Dalto, I think, in the Wall Street Journal, should I say, interestingly, from March last year. So I'm fascinated. Obviously, quite a lot of time has passed since this piece was published. But Chris, would you mind starting by just providing our listeners and viewers with a bit of a summary of what the article kind of covers, and perhaps just picking out whatever you thought were the most interesting points made in the piece?
Yeah, no, perfect. I think it was a great article around climate transition action plans. So I suppose it's just another name for, decarbonisation action plans, etc. But and when I read the first paragraph was around about how people just used to make their commitments in the past, but now you need to do more than just making your commitments. And as soon as I read that, that's when I just went straight back to that EY quote that I mentioned earlier, because I said, the FTSE 100 in the UK are very much prevalent in terms of, make the commitment, but have the action plan. It then clearly talks about the need for climate transition action plans around how they can add value, about how you need to do it over the life of the action plan that you're actually looking to implement. It does talk about it from a change management perspective. But then it does talk around, 5 key areas to actually focus on. And I took these 5 key areas and I almost tried to then distill them and compare them to the actual action plan that I wrote myself. So according to the article, and I'll go over these. So the 5 actions to develop a climate transition action plan: set a future vision, identify challenges to overcome, identify and engage with stakeholders, match resources with high priority targets, establish effective governance mechanisms and capabilities. So they were the 5 key areas that came out. And it's probably worth maybe delving into those, in each of those in some detail, because I think that with some of what we've spoken about already, I think there's some great bits that do align it. But it was a great article that's, again, taking some quite big complex themes and just distilling it down. And, 5 key takeaways or 5 actions are quite easy to sort of get your head around and think about.
Chris, that was absolutely brilliantly summarized. For anyone that wants to go and look at the source article and check it out, we'll obviously be linking to it in all of our various materials. But Chris has really given you, I guess, the headlines from the piece. Chris, I wanted to ask you. In fact, I think before you introduced the article, as you said, we were talking about like, how do you get this stuff right, or how do you enact this kind of change, and what's the strategic approach? And so much of those 5 elements, as you say, that you described, fit perfectly with that. What are the bits in the in those 5 suggested sort of next steps, if you like, that perhaps didn't align or don't align with your thinking, or is everything set in terms of your understanding of how you approach these things?
I think there's some that sort of resonate more than others. Clearly, set a future vision. That is an absolute must. That's a future vision. That is a commitment. They are targets. That is why we want to do it, when we want to do it, and how we want to do it. So, you will never achieve anything without that vision. So I think that was the really important bit. I think that identify challenges to overcome. I think sometimes that might actually end up being a little bit further down, because I think sometimes once you've done your vision, you then need to sort of spend your time engaging with your stakeholders. So I think, again, it's one of these ones, Charlie. I think that the 5 they've got there, I probably think are the 5 right elements, but it goes back to the point previously. Are they in the right order? So, because, you want to set the vision, engage, take stakeholders with you, maybe realign your purpose, get that broader corporate customer consensus and buy-in. And then, the next one I had was, establish effective governance mechanisms, because I think that from the outset, governance is so important about this. How do you bring transparency right through the business in terms of, and you want people to know how they're feeding into this broader corporate commitment and how their role's important. So I'd put the governance at the front, because I think really good governance, and I was part of an organization that had some exceptional governance around this, and it just drives the plan forward. It really gets it cantering when you get it right. So I think people can sometimes look at governance as slowing something down. Get it, and this is the absolute opposite to that. You can absolutely get out of the traps really quickly with some fantastic governance that keeps it away from the C-suite. You go to them when you need it, and you just get, you get cracking with the deliver the plan. So future vision, stakeholders, governance, and then I think it's around, match your resources with your high priority targets, and then identify the challenges to overcome, and then back and start again. So again, the 5 are good and the 5 are correct, but I've just sort of reordered them a little.
I think that, and I'm so pleased you've done that in that way, because as you've said before, the whole like identifying the challenges that need to be overcome, what happens next. We'll do that at the point at which you've got some momentum and you've made some wins, essentially. And that's what the redefining, if you like, of those 5 sections does. Let me ask you, and we've kind of alluded to it before, but obviously this whole idea of CTAPs and putting these things together is fantastic and something that obviously we want as many organizations to adopt as possible. What would your response, Chris, be to anyone that was sort of slightly, I guess, disparaging or inquisitive about, wait, is this just not another box ticking exercise that organizations are going through in order to sort of kick the can down the road, if you like, and not actually take action? What would be your response to somebody that had sort of a curious eye, if you like, over the whole notion of a transition plan?
Well, the first bit is that if you do it over a long-term horizon and you do want to kick the can down the road, as you alluded to, Charlie, you actually understand what the implications of kicking the can down the road are. So, there might be some, the business might want to focus on growth, say, for the next 2 or 3 years. And they might say, we're going to invest our money in growth and we're going to defer that. Fine, absolutely. But at least then you understand what the nuances of that decision are in terms of where you're investing now and how that impacts your capital envelope and your investment, etc. So I think that's the first bit. It gives you just a really good understanding of what that longer term horizon is going to be. If you're listed, it is great because you've got a great opportunity then to share, with the markets. This is our plan. This is what we think it's going to cost, in terms of what that investment looks like. Clearly, businesses invest in the maintenance, upgrade, upkeep of their properties, their assets, etc. It gives you an ability to align different investment cycles. So by pushing stuff forward, or bringing stuff forward or pushing it back, just by getting that better alignment can reduce cost. It gives you a longer term procurement strategy. And also, if you look at it from sort of a property perspective, it gives you an ability to understand, have you got some particular assets that just aren't going to pass muster in terms of what you want, and then could lead to a broader disposal strategy and what that looks like. The plan is the bedrock of the fundamental decision making for that business that so many other elements can anchor around. And I just think it enables organizations to make really good, smart, intelligent, financially motivated corporate decisions that can ultimately add value and save money in the long run. And you've absolutely brilliantly described that, Chris. And is it fair to sort of, it is essentially as much of a risk management action plan as it is ultimately a climate transition action plan? You can just replace the words. It's about sound corporate planning. You can almost, if you want to remove the sort of contentious notion of climate transition, you can, and you can just say it's about planning sensibly for the future. Absolutely. Some of the elements that sit within it, Charlie, will probably drop out and sit as part of your broader risk management plan. The two go hand in hand together.
Let's move on. You've kind of alluded to there, talking about, the real estate sector. And I guess, again, I might be getting my numbers here wrong, but I think it's, when we talk about the built environment and real estate sector, it accounts for, I think, nearly 40% of all global emissions. So you've definitely taken on, you've always took on a challenge, I think, as you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, Chris. But when you think about that, when you think about the size again and the scale of the challenge that's at play with the built environment or the real estate sector, like, what do you think are the sort of most compelling issues that are at play within the industry that are stopping things like proper climate transition plans being implemented? Like, what is stopping the progress within the sector at this point?
That's a great question, Charlie. I think that if I look at logistics as an example, first and foremost, so I think the logistics, the industrial logistics sector is a great opportunity. And again, just to give you another stat, I wrote something down earlier that shows the scale of opportunity within the logistics sector, but then it's also a double-edged sword that the UK Warehousing Association in 2022 said that using only the largest 20% of warehouses in the UK, there is enough roof space for solar, to double the UK solar generation capacity. So,
wow.
So you look at the opportunity that's there, but then I think we get into the infrastructure to enable that to happen. And I think that is one of the blockers at the moment, because you've got people that say, I want to do this. I want to invest in that. I want to do on-site renewables. I want to do, low carbon technologies. I want to build it into my action plans, but I don't know when. So if I want to go and build a new, million square foot distribution and logistics center, and I want to cover the roof in solar, and I want to do it in 5 years, I know I can build the thing in 5 years, but can I actually make use of the entirety of the solar on that roof in 5 years? Because I might not be able to actually get it into the grid. And I think some of the people we speak to, they're the challenges they're facing, because they do want to take a look at it through that longer term view. And they know they can build it. They'll get the planning, but it's then, well, when it comes to the renewable strategy or the energy strategy or the low carbon strategies, if that's like, can I actually realize my dream and my ambition as to what I want to deliver? And that's probably one of the biggest challenges we face in that regard at the moment.
But equally, Chris, just to pick up on what you said earlier when I asked you about your relative optimism for how things are going to play out, I think you mentioned that, for example, grid evolution or development was or innovation was something that had made you hopeful that we are going to be able to address some of these issues. So is it just the speed of these things? It's creating the delay, and the delay is the thing that ultimately we're trying to sort of navigate at the moment, is how can we do these things more quickly? Not that we don't know how we ultimately go about addressing 40% of all global emissions coming from the built environment sector.
Yeah, so I think it is that pace of change in that, right, like, and the thing is, Tony, the grid reform is happening like right now as we speak. And that's been going on for the last few months, and that's making some huge strides forward. So I think that once there's some clarity around that, people will hopefully be able to plan with a lot more confidence. I think the other bit as well, that's stopping people putting those action plans together is money, is funding, because they almost look at it at its macro level and go, it's going to cost us this, or I've read an article that says that it's going to cost X billion to do this across the UK. I think once you actually do the action plan and take that leap of faith and do the action plan and understand what it's going to cost, there are people out there. There is lots of money out there that wants to invest in these scenarios, and they want to invest in these interventions, these investments, etc. And I think that, one of the really exciting bits is to match the money with the opportunity. So I think if we do more of that, which sounds a really sort of obtuse thing to say, because you think the money would normally find its way to the opportunity and vice versa, but invariably it doesn't. So, I think if we can then, where people have that ambition to go and, to deliver and start to deliver and do some pilots and do some trials. I think once we find a way to take funding or lack of, if we can just remove that as a barrier, I think you will have people then going, I have the confidence that we can do this. We are now going to go and put these detailed plans together because I know I can deliver that plan.
But and just so I'm clear, Chris, because I think I understand you correctly there. But what you're saying is that we need these overarching climate transition action plans in order to present the opportunity for the money, the funding, to then ultimately realize what's in those plans. We need to showcase to the investment investors, if you like, the opportunity to invest in these companies to achieve these outcomes. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because the thing is, Charlie, that you may, some of this money may just not be for an asset. Some of this money may be, well, we're going to look at, we want to invest in what you're going to do over the next 3 years. Maybe it may go broader than just one intervention. And there'll be different structures, etc., around how you go about doing that. But I think putting the plan together just gives absolute transparency in terms of what you're looking to do, when you're looking to do it, and why you want to do it, and how you're prioritizing. Because I think if you're then having the conversation around any investment, it's with absolute clarity, the money then knows what you're looking to do, why and when.
Which makes it so compelling. We've created, I think, such a compelling proposition for anyone out there that is looking into this stuff, because you're essentially saying, by creating one of these plans, you are mitigating risk and you are creating a compelling case for further investment. And if that, in terms of two major outcomes that presumably a lot of organizations are looking to realize, it becomes an absolute no-brainer to invest the time, energy, and resource into this degree of planning. Chris, as you can see, we've whistle-stop talked through kind of 45 minutes or so. I know we've just got to touch the surface of all things transition plans, but it was a brilliant initial insight. Let's conclude now with the magic wand question. I'm fascinated to see what you're going to do with this. If I was to hand you a magic wand right now, Chris, and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
I have made so many notes on this, and I have tried so hard to come up with one thing, Charlie. And I know what I've written down in front of me is start when it comes to the corporate world. What would I change, or what would I want? I've written down: start, don't delay, always collaborate, because a shared vision equals reduced cost. And that was and I think that if from a corporate world, if everyone realizes that we're not competing and we are sort of with this all heading in the same direction, we might be moving at different paces, but we are all going in the same direction. If we could find a way to work together, I think we'll drive better value. I think we'll go quicker. We'll reduce costs. We can then focus on some of the broader elements around the skills gap, training, upskilling, UK investment, etc. And I think that if we find a way to do that, we will solve an awful lot of problems very, very quickly, because we will all benefit from collaborating together.
Hear, hear. You're going to get your first hear, hear of the show. I hand out hear, hears for guests that I think make particularly sound suggestions. I'm going to play one devil's advocate question for you on that point, Chris. And it's about competition. What would your response, in light of what you've just said, be to the one organization turning around to another and saying, we are both tendering for that contract, and we know that there are characteristics or defining KPIs that are analyzed against our sustainability credentials against one company to the next? What would be your rebuttal to them saying that we therefore don't want to get involved in the partnership collaboration piece?
But I think in that regard, Charlie, it comes back to how you actually tender it and procure it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you're going to have a set of KPIs, etc., in terms of how it's delivered. But I think that, if you look at broader buying clubs coming together, and then, you think if three or four huge organizations came together and put a global tender out, and then it was, and different people are different pieces of the pie based on, geographical variances, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You overcome that. You do overcome that. I think, short term, I think when you're looking at tenders that look at cost instead of value, and you just want a quick buck and you want it now, I think that then ultimately that does go against what I just said. But if you are prepared to be mature and look at everything through a far longer term lens and work with your peers, work with your competition, and come together with absolute transparency, and then you give the supply chain the certainty in terms of what that investment is going to be over the years ahead so that they can set themselves up for it. You drive the value, you reduce the cost. I call it the incremental CapEx. That comes down over time. And then with certainty comes planning. And then you can put all of the elements that we've spoken about together in place.
A perfect rebuttal to my scenario. That was fantastic, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for giving up some of your time.
Pleasure, Charlie. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And thanks for the invite again.
And that's all for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Chris Wright, Director and Head of Sustainability and Decarbonisation at Avison Young, for joining me. In our conversation, Chris brought sharp insight into what it really takes to embed climate transition plans into the DNA of a business, not just setting goals, but aligning strategy, capital, and accountability to get there. This episode was brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit antigreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. And until next time, stay responsible.